Serafina Cole had never asked for much. She had never asked for a big house, a grand title, or a seat at the long table where the powerful people of the Ashvale Kingdom ate their meals and made their decisions. All she had ever wanted, in the quiet and honest part of her heart, was to belong somewhere, to be seen, to matter to someone. She did not get any of those things easily. Life had made sure of that from the very beginning. Her father was an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack structure, a kind and gentle man who had spent his whole life being talked over and looked past. Her mother had been human, with no wolf blood at all, and she had passed away when Serafina was 9 years old, leaving behind nothing but a worn wool blanket and a small wooden comb that Serafina kept in her coat pocket every single day after that. Growing up on the outer edges of pack territory, Serafina had learned early that the world was not going to hand her anything. She woke up early, she worked hard, she asked for help only when she truly had no other option, and she kept going, even on the days when keeping going felt like trying to walk through deep water. Her wolf had emerged when she was 16, later than most. She had named her Sable, because the wolf was pale and quiet, in a way that reminded Serafina of a winter sky just before the snow came, still and full of something waiting to happen. Other young wolves in the pack had powerful, loud, energetic animals inside them that pushed at their skin with excitement. Sable was different. Sable was patient. Sable watched. No one noticed that as a gift. They noticed it as a flaw. By the time Serafina was 22, she had built herself a small and steady life. She worked in the pack's eastern storage yards, keeping records of supplies and coordinating deliveries to the outer settlements. She was good at it. She was precise and reliable, and never missed a detail. But she was invisible in the way that people who are good at quiet work often are. Her presence was felt only when something went wrong, and her absence was never mentioned when everything went right. She had almost made peace with that invisible life when the blood moon ceremony arrived. The blood moon came once every 7 years, and it was the night when mate bonds revealed themselves. The ceremony was held in the great hall of Ashvale Palace, and every unmated wolf of age was expected to attend. Serafina had pressed her best dress and polished her boots, and told herself it didn't matter, that she would probably feel nothing, that she should not hope too hard. She had learned to keep her hopes small and manageable, like a fire in a very small jar, enough to give light, not enough to burn anything down if it went out. She was wrong to keep it small that night. The moment she stepped into the great hall, the bond pulled at her like a rope tied around her chest. It was not a gentle tug. It was a full, sudden pull that made her breath leave her body. She followed it through the crowd of assembled wolves, nobles, warriors, and palace staff, past faces she recognized and faces she didn't, until she was standing at the front of the room. And the bond led her to King Caden Vorath. He was everything she was not. He was tall and broad, and had held the title of Alpha King since he was 19, inheriting it after his father's sudden illness. 6 generations of royal blood ran through him. He had led 3 successful campaigns to protect the kingdom's borders. He was respected, feared, and admired in equal measure, and when he entered a room, every conversation in it stopped. He was also, in this moment, looking at her with an expression she could not immediately read. She realized, in the space of a heartbeat, that he already knew. He had already felt the pull, and he had already decided what he was going to do about it. He turned to face the assembled court, placed one hand over his chest where the bond burned, and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through every inch of that silent hall. "I reject you, Serafina Cole, as my Luna and my mate." She did not remember falling. She remembered the stone floor being very cold, and she remembered the sound the room made. First silence, then a ripple of voices, then, from somewhere near the back, laughter. She remembered the laughter most clearly. It followed her into the dark. She woke up 3 days later in the lowest ward of the palace infirmary. A young healer she had never met told her, in a carefully neutral voice, that the bond break had caused a physical reaction in her body, and that she was lucky to have recovered as quickly as she had. The healer then left, and Serafina lay in the narrow bed, with the wool blanket pulled up to her chin, and stared at the stone ceiling. On the 4th morning she sat up, and she noticed that Sable felt different. It was hard to describe. Sable had always been quiet, But this was not the same quiet as before. Before, the wolf's quiet had felt like patience, like waiting. Now it felt like weight, like something that had been compressed for a very long time and was now pressing back from the inside. Serafina looked at her own reflection in the small water basin across the room. Her eyes were the same, but when she looked inward, toward the place where Sable lived, the wolf's eyes were black. Not dark brown, not deep gray. Black, in a way that seemed to pull light toward it rather than reflect it. Sable had been waiting. She had been fed, all those years, on every dismissal, every overlooked effort, every moment of being treated as less than. She had taken all of it in quietly, the way deep roots take in water, invisibly, patiently, completely. The bond break had not weakened her. It had been the last thing she needed. Serafina did not tell anyone what she had noticed. She checked herself out of the infirmary, collected her things from her small room in the workers' quarter, and walked north. The Ashvale borderlands began about 40 miles from the palace, where the maintained roads ended, and the tree line thickened into something old and tangled and dark. No pack had held that territory in 2 centuries. It was home to wolves who had been cast out, to old territorial disputes that had never been resolved, and to a general atmosphere of danger that had discouraged everyone who had ever tried to settle or patrol it. The Alpha King's own warriors called it the Dead Ground. Serafina walked into it on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, with a pack on her back and the wooden comb in her coat pocket. She came out 11 days later. In those 11 days, she had done something that no battalion of warriors had managed. She had moved through the borderlands without provoking the rogue wolves who lived there. Not because she had fought her way through, but because when Sable came forward, the rogue wolves went still. They did not challenge. They did not run. They simply watched her pass with a kind of careful, instinctive respect, the way smaller animals go still when something larger and older moves through a forest. She spoke to the ones who would speak to her. She listened to the ones who had grievances. She mapped the territory with careful, handwritten notes, and built a mental picture of where the tensions were and why. By the time she walked back out into the southern grassland, the borderlands were quiet for the first time in living memory. News travels in a wolf kingdom the way it travels anywhere, quickly, and not always accurately. But the core of what people were saying was true. A pale woman with a black-eyed wolf had gone into the dead ground alone and come out unharmed, and behind her, the rogue wolves had settled like a lake, going still after a stone is dropped into it. In the palace, this news arrived at an uncomfortable time. King Caden had announced his chosen mate, Lady Isolde Varon, from the most politically powerful family in the eastern region. The mating ceremony was being planned. The kingdom was supposed to be in a celebratory mood. Instead, the Alpha King's generals were standing in his war room with very long faces, because something was happening on the eastern border that they did not know how to handle. A man named Breck Ashton had united 4 rival packs under his leadership, and he had gained access to a bound seer, a rare individual whose ability allowed him to perceive what a pack's next move would be before they made it. Every strategy Caden's generals drafted was countered before it could be executed. Every defensive formation was anticipated. They had lost 3 supply corridors in 6 weeks, and were about to lose a 4th. The Council of Elders met in emergency session. The northern borderlands situation was raised, not as a threat, but as evidence of something the council needed to take seriously. A woman with no rank, no title, and no pack had done what trained warriors could not. She had stabilized the most volatile territory in the kingdom, alone, in less than 2 weeks. Half the elders wanted to offer her a formal position. The other half were not sure whether she should be classified as a resource or a concern. Caden sat at the head of the table and said nothing for a long time. He had felt the bond break from his side too. He had expected it to fade, the way a bruise fades, present for a while, then gone. It had not faded. It had hardened into a low and constant awareness, like a compass needle that always pointed north whether he wanted to check it or not. He knew, without being able to fully explain how he knew, that she was not in the borderlands anymore. She was moving south. She had already decided to come back. She arrived before they sent for her. The north entrance to the throne room had been sealed for 200 years. The lock on it was old and complex and had, over time, become a kind of legend. an architectural curiosity that palace tours pointed at, and historians wrote dry paragraphs about. On the morning Serafina returned to the palace, that door opened from the outside. She walked in without ceremony, without announcement, and without a bow. The court was in session. Every important person in the kingdom was in that room. They watched her cross the floor with the particular silence that falls over people who are trying to figure out what they are looking at. She was lean and calm and unhurried. The torches in the throne room, which had been bright a moment before, seemed somehow dimmer, as if the light itself had redistributed itself slightly to account for her presence. She stopped at a reasonable distance from the throne, looked at the king directly, and said, "I am not here for a title. I am here because you have a problem on your eastern border, and I have already solved your northern one, and it seems practical to continue." Someone near the back of the room laughed, not in mockery, but in the way people laugh when they are surprised and slightly nervous and cannot stop themselves. What happened over the next several days in the Eastern Territory was never fully documented, because the people who accompanied Serafina returned with incomplete accounts. They agreed on the broad facts. The seer lost his ability to predict movements. The four-pack coalition collapsed inward under the pressure of its own disagreements. Breck Ashton, the warlord who had outmaneuvered Caden's generals for 6 weeks, surrendered in person. He walked to the palace on foot and placed his own chains on himself and said, when questioned, that he had looked at Serafina's wolf and understood that he had already lost. Sable had not attacked him. She had simply looked at him. The title the kingdom gave Serafina was Border Sovereign, an old rank that had not been used in centuries, that sat above Warden and below no one except the king himself. She accepted it without ceremony, the way she accepted most things, with a nod and a quiet thank you, and then she got back to work. She did not move into the palace. She kept a stone house at the northern edge of the borderlands, which she had repaired with her own hands during those 11 days she had spent alone in the territory. The house was small and well organized, and had a good view of the tree line. She was content there, in a way she had never been in the workers' quarter of the palace, surrounded by people who saw through her, rather than at her. The kingdom changed the way it said her name, slowly, then quickly, the way most changes happen. Where it had been a quiet joke, the Omega Girl, the rejected one, the woman who collapsed on the palace steps, it became something else entirely. Parents used it to teach children that strength does not always announce itself. Warriors mentioned it before hard assignments, not as a prayer, but as a reminder. The name Serafina Cole became the kind of name that makes the air in a room feel slightly different when it is spoken. King Caden Vorath dissolved his betrothal to Lady Isolde Varen 14 months after Serafina's return. He gave the court no explanation. On the night of the next blood moon, he rode north alone. He did not bring guards or advisors or any announcement of his intention. He rode north until the road ended, and then he kept going through the dark tree line until a stone house appeared with a single light in the window. What he said when he stood at her door, and what she said back to him, was not recorded anywhere. That conversation belonged to them alone. What the border guards posted 2 miles south reported was much simpler. They heard 2 wolves call out at the same time, in perfect harmony, rising into the cold night air, and carrying across the open land for a distance that no wolf sound should have been able to travel. The guards agreed later that it was unlike anything they had ever heard before, not frightening, but full of something that made them stand up straighter without knowing why. One was the voice of a king's wolf. The other was enormous and black-eyed, and it made the branches of the old trees tremble gently, even though the night was perfectly still.